A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
Well, artifacts recovered from a cave in central Oregon were determined to possibly be the oldest known sown material in the world.
A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon. Well, artifacts recovered from a cave in central Oregon were determined to possibly be the oldest known sown material in the world. Everything you were taught about America's first people is wrong, and the proof is buried in a cave in Oregon nobody bothered to dig deep enough into until now. Archaeologists pulled something from that cave, so old the lab refused to trust its own machine. Ran the test 3 times and got the same impossible answer every time. Human DNA. Patrick O'Grady, along with other archaeologists and students at the University of Oregon, have discovered new evidence thousands of years older than the story printed in every textbook. Then a second Oregon site went further, sealing a stone tool under volcanic ash. Older still, this is the discovery quietly rewriting who really came to America first. And it starts right now. The Oregon Cave. The Paisley Caves are a row of dry rock shelters carved into a hillside in south-central Oregon in a stretch of high desert most people will never see, music, and few would think to look twice at. Archaeologists had known about this place for decades. They walked past it, noted it, filed it away because everyone already assumed the question of who the first Americans were had been settled a long time ago. It was printed in the textbooks, framed in the museum halls, hanging on the wall like a finished painting. So why bother going down another layer in a dusty cave in the middle of nowhere? Which means this is among the oldest artifacts in North America. Then a University of Oregon team finally did. Picture the actual conditions. Not a bright air-conditioned lab, but a dim rock shelter baked by decades of high desert sun, where every bucket of soil has to be carried out by hand and screened before anyone can even guess whether it holds anything at all. Most days it holds nothing. A flake of stone, a fragment of bone too small to identify. The kind of work that tests a person's patience far more than it tests their intellect. And then layer after layer down, the excavation reached a level where the dirt itself changed color and texture. And that is where the team found what they were not expecting to find. And what they pulled out of the ground was not a spear music point. It was preserved human waste, dried and hardened, sitting exactly where a person had left it thousands music of years earlier. A coprolite, the single least glamorous artifact in all of archaeology. That is the detail that makes this discovery so easy to underestimate at first. A find that humble does not make the evening news. It does not get its own museum hall. But the dry desert air of the high Oregon Plateau had done something no laboratory on Earth can replicate. It kept that fragile organic material intact century after century, while everything else that ever lived and died in that cave rotted away into nothing. The collection is comprised of 55 artifacts, including 2 pieces of animal hide stitched together. And locked inside it was music, something a stone tool can never give you. Not a shape, not a guess. Human DNA. Researchers sequenced the mitochondrial DNA, pulled from those ancient coprolites, and the result matched the Native American founding haplogroups A2 and B2. Not a failed migration that wandered onto the continent and died out. Music, the direct ancestors of indigenous people alive in America right now. People with names, music with families, with a bloodline running straight back into the dirt of a cave most of the world has never heard of. Sit with that for a second because it is the detail that changes the entire stakes of this story. This was not a curiosity behind glass. This was proof in living genetic code that the oldest chapter of the American story never ended. Music. To question that date was not just to question a number. It was to tell a lot of important people that the thing they had defended their entire careers was a fairy tale. Oregon just drove a 1,000-year wedge between Clovis and the truth. The Clovis people were not first. They were not even close. Before we go further, if this is already the kind of thing that gets under your skin, hit subscribe now, because the deeper we go here, the harder this story gets to explain away, and you will not want to miss where it ends up. And Oregon was not finished. One date from one cave is exactly the kind of thing the old guard can wave away as a fluke. A single strange result. Contamination. Bad luck. It has happened before, But 70 miles from this cave, a second Oregon site was about to take that date and drag it down into something far older and far harder to dismiss. Not a fluke this time, a pattern. And patterns are what end careers. Music, this is where it stops being about a date and starts being about who these people actually were. Rimrock Draw. 70 miles from the Paisley Caves outside the town of Riley in Harney County, there is a place called Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. Dr. Patrick O'Grady, a University of Oregon archaeologist, has been digging there since 2011. For years, the site gave up almost nothing. A few obsidian, music flakes, a groundstone tool near the front of the shelter. This is the slow, unglamorous work that never makes a documentary. Knees in the dirt, brush, music, and screen, season after season, with no guarantee any of it would ever amount to anything. Rimrock Draw did not hand the team DNA the way Paisley did. It handed. And the moment you accept the timeline is broken, a worse question opens up. Because 700 miles south of Oregon in a white desert nobody had bothered to map, there were footprints, 61 of them, and the people who left them were not supposed to exist. Ghost tracks in the White Sands. White Sands National Park is a field of pale gypsum dunes in southern New Mexico. So white and so still, it barely looks like it belongs on this planet. In 2009, researchers crossing the dried bed of an ancient lake called Lake Otero noticed shapes pressed into the gypsum. At first, the shapes barely registered as anything at all, just faint discolorations in ground that has been baked and rebaked by sun for thousands of years. It was only when the light hit them at the right angle, low and raking across the surface, that the outlines resolved into something unmistakable. Footprints. Human footprints, 61 of them, brutally clear. You can see the toes, the curve of the arch. Some are tiny, the size of a child's foot. Others belong to adults moving fast, almost running. This is not the abstract evidence of a stone or a bone. This is a moment, a group of people, children included, walking along the edge of an Ice Age lake on an ordinary day, leaving prints in soft mud that the sun baked hard in sediment, then buried until someone finally walked across them again thousands of years later. White Sands National Park is answering one of their most frequently music-asked questions. Fossilized human footprints discovered at the park in 2021. You are not reading about these people. You are standing in their footsteps. The first dates came in 2021, music from radioarbon on the seeds of a plant called spiral ditch found in the same layers as the prints. 21,000 to 23,000 years old. The backlash was immediate, and to be fair, it was not baseless. Skeptics raised a genuine methodological objection. The seeds could have absorbed old carbon from groundwater and looked falsely ancient as a result. A known problem with aquatic plants in particular. That is exactly the kind of challenge good science has built to survive, not the kind you can wave away as bias. So, the team went back and tested again, this time using conifer pollen, which comes straight from land-based trees and does not absorb groundwater carbon the same way. Same answer, 21,000 to 23,000 years. Then in June 2025, a third study in Science Advances used organic material from wetland mud and lake sediments. An entirely different kind of material, music, tested by an entirely different lab. 3 independent sources, seeds, pollen, mud, all landing in the same window, the height of the last ice age, exactly when the textbook swears North America was empty. And those people were not alone. Their prints run alongside the tracks of Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths. Enormous ice age animals that vanished from the continent thousands of years ago, frozen into the same mud at the same moment. In places the tracks even cross, a human path curving around where a giant sloth had recently stood, as if someone had deliberately kept their distance from an animal easily capable of killing them. Human and beast side by side, sharing a shoreline the textbook insisted no human had ever seen. This is what Oregon set loose. Once the field had to take Oregon seriously, the rest of the evidence stopped looking like a string of mistakes and started looking like a pattern. Music, White Sands showed whole families walking the continent deep in the Ice Age, nowhere near any ice-free corridor at a time when the old map says the door into America had not even opened yet. But White, Music, Sands tops out around 23,000 years. There is something in Southern California so much older it makes White Sands look modern. And nobody was even looking for it. They were building a freeway. The freeway dig. A freeway crew in Southern California was cutting through soil when the blade hit bone. Work stopped. There were no archaeologists on site, no research grant, music, no plan. Just workers, machines, and a road that needed building. This is the part people forget about how some of the biggest discoveries in archaeology actually happen. Nobody sets out looking for a 130,000-year-old crime music scene. A construction foreman notices something in the dirt that does not look like a rock or a pipe. Makes a phone call he did not expect to make that day. Music, and an entire field of study gets turned upside down because the job site happened to cut through exactly the wrong or right patch of ground. Paleontologists were called in, and what they lifted out were the partial remains of a single mastodon, an elephant-like animal extinct since the end of the Ice Age. But the bones had not simply fallen there, and music fossilized in peace. As the team brushed away the dirt, an unease spread through everyone standing around that pit. They were not looking at a fossil. They were looking at a seam. The mastodon bones showed spiral fractures, the kind of break that only happens to fresh bone. Old fossilized bone is dry and brittle, and when it breaks, it shatters. Fresh bone twists and spirals as it breaks. Someone had cracked these open while they were still fresh, almost certainly to reach the marrow inside. This was not scavenging or accident. This was butchery. Music, a deliberate technique performed by someone who understood exactly how to get the most out of a carcass. Scattered among the bones were 5 large cobbles, fist-sized stones far too heavy to have washed in with water. Geologists checked. Water did not carry them there. People did. Hammerstones and anvils carried to that spot used to break the bones open, then left music behind in the dirt when whoever did it walked away and never came back. Here is the number that empties the room. The bone was dated using uranium-thorium analysis, and every test returned the music same result. Around 130,700 years old. Read that number again, because it does not fit in the same sentence as everything else in this story. The oldest site discussed so far, White Sands, sat around 23,000 years. This is more than 5 times older than that. Older than our own species, is widely thought to have spread out of Africa at all. In 2017, Nature published it. The authors Stephen Holen, Kathleen Holen, Thomas Deere, and Richard Fuliger wrote it in the most cautious hedged language they could find. And it still went off like a bomb. Some kind of human species was in North America 130,700 years ago. Not modern humans, not Neanderthals. Something the existing models do not even have a name for. Most of the field simply refuses to touch the site. Not because anyone has disproven it, but because it is too radical, too costly to too many careers to even engage with. There is no comfortable revision that fits a site this old music into the existing timeline. Accepting it does not just move the date back a few thousand years the way Paisley and Rimrock Draw did. It suggests an entirely different unnamed population was here doing ordinary human things at a point in history when the accepted models say no version of our species had even reached Asia yet. That is not a small correction. That is a different book entirely, and most working archaeologists would rather leave that book closed. So the question just hangs there. Who broke open those bones? Nobody knows. Nobody can even reasonably guess. It was some other branch of the human family standing in Music, California more than 100,000 years before the story is supposed to start, doing something as intimate as cracking a bone for the marrow inside. This leaves Oregon's discovery sitting inside a much bigger and stranger frame. If Oregon proved people were here long before Clovis, California is whispering that someone was here 100,000 years before that. Which drags us straight back to the question Oregon could never answer on its own. How did any of them get here? Because the old answer, one frozen door out of Siberia, is starting to fall apart. A different door. For a century, the answer was one word. Bingia, the land bridge from Siberia exposed when so much of the world's water was locked up in ice. One door opening once, everyone walking through on foot, north to south. Exactly the way the textbook diagram always drew it. Simple. Music. And simple is easy to teach. But Oregon's Western STEM tools do not look like anything that walked out of that corridor. And that is the loose thread that unravels the whole map. If the oldest toolmakers in Oregon were not carrying the Clovis kit that supposedly came through that door, maybe they did not come through that door at all. Music start with a place that should have made a crossing impossible. Cree. The island has been an island for about 5 million years. Never once connected to the mainland during the entire time humans have existed. There is no walking to Cree. Music. Anyone who set foot there had to cross at least 40 miles of open sea in a real boat built on purpose by someone who understood the water. A team led by Thomas Strayer and Alani Penagel found stone tools at 2 sites on Cree between 130,000 and 700,000 years old, resembling tools made by Homo heibergensis and Homo erectus, human ancestors from long before modern humans existed. If they could cross the Mediterranean that early, the comfortable assumption that early humans could not handle open water was finished. As one member of the team put it, if early humans could move around the Mediterranean before 130,000 years ago, they could cross other water too. That single sentence reopens every migration map ever drawn. Now bring it back across the world. Researchers tracing a mitochondrial lineage called D4H3 have followed it to the northern coast of China. And the data did not show one migration. It showed two. The first wave around 26,000 years ago most likely hugged the coastline by boat, moving from China up through Japan and out across the Pacific Rim, camp by camp, following the fish and the tides. Not a desperate crossing, but a slow, patient drift along the edge of a continent. One settlement at a time, generation folding into generation. Picture small family groups living off the shoreline, never far from sight of land. The children of one camp, eventually paddling a little further out than their parents ever dared, decade after decade, until the coastline itself had carried them across an ocean without any single person ever making a heroic music voyage. No dramatic crossing, just the sea and time, music, and a shoreline that kept going. The second wave around 15,000 years ago took the land route across Binjia. And that second group is the one tied to the Clovis-era populations everyone once crowned as music, the first Americans. They were not first. They were latecomers, walking a path others had already traveled by sea thousands of years earlier. The Clovis hunters, standing at the front of every museum diorama, were not pioneers breaking into an empty world. They were arriving late to a continent already explored, settled, and crossed by people who came a completely different way. The tools agree with that reading. The same stonework techniques show up across China, Japan, and the Americas. The same blades, the same points, the same choices about how to turn a piece of stone into an edge. That is a trail, a line of people carrying the same craft across the water, running straight back to the coast of China. The same separate tradition Oregon's western stem tools belong to. The knife under the ash at Rimrock Draw was not an oddity. It was a clue pointing across an ocean. What Oregon started. So, the tidy story is gone. The first Americans were not who we were told. They did not arrive when we were told. They may not have even walked. A row of dry caves in Oregon cracked the date open. A war knife under volcanic ash drove it deeper. And footprints in New Mexico, broken bones in California, and DNA from coastal China all fell in behind the same impossible truth Oregon found first. The continent was not empty and waiting. It was already lived in, already crossed, already home to people whose story runs far older, far stranger, and far more tangled than anyone wanted to admit. And it all keeps circling back to the same place. Not New Mexico, not California, not the coast of China, Music, Oregon. A row of dry caves and a wind-blown rock shelter in the high desert where the dirt finally gave up evidence the field could not wave away. What makes Oregon the true origin point of this music story is not just that it was old. Mekraftoff was already whispering that decades earlier, and nobody wanted to listen. It is that Oregon delivered proof on two completely different kinds of evidence, DNA, and a volcanic clock from two sites close enough to reinforce each other at a moment when the field could no longer treat one strange result as noise. That is what actually broke the dam. And it is why every other site in this video gets read differently now than it would have been read 20 years ago. Somewhere out there right now in dirt nobody has touched yet. The next piece is already waiting for the next person to dig deep enough to find it. So who broke open a mastodon's bones in California 130,700 years ago, then set down their stones and vanished? Nobody left a name behind. Nobody left a story. Just a knife, a set of teeth, a footprint pressed in mud, a scrap of dried waste holding a bloodline that never broke. Drop your theory in the comments below, because the honest music answer right now is that nobody knows. If this changed the way you think about who was standing on this land first, subscribe, hit the like button, and drop your theory in the comments, because the next dig is already underway. And when it surfaces, we will be the first to walk you through exactly what they found.